So the framework itself, go back here for a second. This is sort of the center of the triangle of responsibilities, which you all have a handout of also. Some of the slides that we put up here, as you'll see, you don't have to look at them now, they'll come up, but they're really way too complicated to look at as a presentation slide. So we give you copies of those ones, and we'll kind of discuss generalities about those. We can look at more specific details yourself. So this is the center of the triangle, and the triangle within the triangle here is representative of sustainable development, where of course the three pillars are what we call the three pillars of sustainable development. That is the three things that are required within the international system to make sustainable development actually a possibility. So sustainable development was first used in the UN World Commission on Environment and Development report in 1987. They defined it as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, this is a fantastic idea, obviously, and it, generally speaking, the way it has been applied ties together economic development and environmental sustainability. And we felt that this wasn't really sufficient to make development sustainable. So we took those two and we built on that. And the pillars that we came up with are good governance, which is not frequently included within as a necessary component of sustainable development, but is a fairly obvious one. If the government is not doing what it needs to do, how do you expect really anything within the system to work? The government is really the main actor within the system. Environmental sustainability, as I already mentioned, is something that's traditionally tied to sustainable development. And cultural sensitivity is a unique component that we really brought into this. And we're defining it, first of all, we're using culture in a broader sense, not just in terms of what we normally think of, racial, ethnic, religious, but as well we looked at situations such as an organization, a corporation, a government, even an NGO, a non-governmental organization will develop its own culture within the way its employees work and interact, with the way that it interacts with other cultures, be they corporate or governmental, or be they when they're going into a new country that they haven't worked in before. So they need to take account of all of that, the cultural interaction between all of those things. So expanding a little bit on the sensitivity, it implies awareness and respect for the culture that is being discussed or interacted with. And it sort of comes down to a fairly basic formula, which is if you're interacting with a culture, you need an understanding of that culture, and you need to blend that with external knowledge and experience. That is what you're bringing into it. So those three components put together really create a situation where you can develop a sustainable solution, as opposed to a solution that will cease to exist if the local culture doesn't accept it. Now, each of these are fairly interesting in that they relate to the triangle of responsibilities in different ways. Good governance is basically a result of all of the responsibilities within the triangle being fulfilled. Environmental sustainability uses the responsibilities within the triangle, but the will to make it happen must exist separate from the triangle. So actual individuals and actors within the triangle need to say this is important and need to use their responsibilities in order to make it come to fruition. Cultural sensitivity, on the other hand, needs to underlie implementation of all the responsibilities. So from a very fundamental level, all the decisions that are made are culturally sensitive in order for sustainable development to happen legitimately. Now, everything that we've discussed so far is not really part of what we were bringing on, which was a lot of work and necessary, but these individual sections that we'll now talk about are really the parts that we spent the majority of our time. So my part, as I mentioned before, is in civil society. And the reason we start with civil society is we decided that civil society is the conscience and the driver of positive change in the international system. And while that seems like a fairly broad and extravagant statement to make, I think that by the time you see how the framework falls out, or at least we hope you'll all agree with this. The United Nations definition of civil society is that it is associations who voluntarily advance their interests, ideas, or ideologies. They're non-profit and non-government, which of course distinguishes them both from the private sector and it distinguishes them from government. We expanded this slightly to include individuals as well as groups, as it would be difficult to argue that either Bono or Bill Gates are not members of civil society because of everything they're doing today. And another important point within defining civil society, and this ties in especially because there's a lot of discussion both today and within our assigned responsibilities of accountability within the system. Who's accountable for what and who holds who accountable. And especially within civil society, from both government and private sector actors, there's a lot of discussion around that today. But this point is very important to that, in that civil society practices constituent, not representative politics. What that means is that a government represents its people. Especially in the US, we have a democratic system, the representation is direct. But nonetheless, it is the job of the government to represent their people. Whereas civil society, members of civil society, are not representative, they are the people themselves. So they're only representing their own viewpoints. So to hold them accountable in the same way that you would hold government accountable is not, there's not a direct correlation there. There needs to be that different understanding of the accountability that they're held to. In that their accountability is more about the legitimacy of their ideas, about what they do, about how that furthers the system. So this is the first corner of the triangle, the civil society corner, and there's only 5 responsibilities that civil society has, although every single actor, and this differentiates civil society from the actors, in that every single actor within civil society is not expected to fill all of these, all 5 responsibilities. Civil society members, each one is very different from each other one, and they're a very diverse group. They hold each other accountable, they hold private sector accountable, they hold governments accountable, and as you'll see right in the middle is the responsibility to hold accountable. They also hold themselves accountable. And Danny, who's in government, as was mentioned, we sort of role-played this, and he and I had a 2 to 3 week long, let's call it serious discussion about about whether or not one of civil society's responsibilities should be to follow the laws of government. And where we came out on that is that there are situations such as Solidarity Group in Poland, such as the situation in Russia right now, or Zimbabwe, where the government, part of what they're trying to accomplish is to repress civil society. So if you make it a responsibility of civil society to follow the laws that are repressing them, suddenly you've just worked yourself completely out of the job with no hopes of working within the framework and actually accomplishing it. So if you're wondering, that's why that component is missing. Moving on, maintaining legitimacy is fairly obvious in that if you aren't perceived as legitimate, you have less power, you have less ability to deal with the other actors in the system. Facilitating the marketplace of ideas. Civil society's responsibility is to to hold forums or to provide situations wherein people from different cultures, people with different ideas can express those ideas. Those ideas can be refined, perfected, and then passed on to either governments or the private sector to continually improve the system. And that, in large part, is where they become the driver of positive change within the system, between that and holding the other actors accountable. As far as supporting government, their responsibility is to, first of all, traditionally, and as Danny said, this is an excellent example of where it broaches the core responsibilities and the responsibilities to sustainable development. In that traditionally, when a government is unable to fulfill its responsibilities, civil society steps in to provide those. Easy examples are health or education, where there are a lot of NGOs working in the third world to provide these things where the governments aren't able to. But what we are proposing as part of supporting government is that they need to take that farther. In that if they're not working to strengthen the capacity of government to take over their own responsibilities, they're not actually providing a sustainable solution. It's not realistic to expect that 20 years down the line, USAID is still going to be providing funding for educating people in Africa, for example. So that's sort of the expansion on that component. And then the last one is individuals' responsibility to participate. Individuals on every level make the entire system work, and especially civil society. Without individuals to participate, nothing will happen. And that then runs into as well their need to participate in government, their need to let private sector companies know what they want so that the products continue to improve, so that economic development can continue. There's a whole cycle, but of course it's all based around individuals. Without individuals, there wouldn't be a need for the entire framework. So then relating this back to the three pillars, good governance is supported by all the responsibilities within the system. And I've listed them here, but it's fairly obvious, as I just said. Individuals participate in government. The marketplace of ideas provides improved ideas for how government should work. They hold government accountable for their own responsibilities. And again, they fill government's capacity while working to restore it where it's lacking. Environmental sustainability. As I mentioned, just under the definition of environmental sustainability, the will has to exist for this to happen. And the main driver of that has to come from civil society. If no one is demanding private sector actors or companies to produce products that are environmentally friendly, or to do so in an environmentally friendly way, they have no motivation at all to do so. Similarly with government, if government doesn't know that the people are demanding this of them, there's no motivation for government to do that. They have their own motivations, and taking care of the environment is not at the top of the list. Cultural sensitivity impacts, and again, this almost comes in on the back end of the responsibilities as opposed to the way that responsibilities are enacted. However, when organizations and individuals interrelate, they need to keep in mind cultural sensitivity, both to further their goals more effectively, as well as what so many people coming in and coming out. Sorry. They also organizations need to take care of their employees. They need to take care of the people that they're working with when they're holding forums. As far as facilitating the marketplace of ideas, they need to be open to different ideas so that they're not repressing those ideas, so the best ones can be found within the ones that are available. And also, as far as individuals, part of their responsibility is to continue to educate themselves. And at least it has been my experience that as we gain a greater understanding of other cultures, we begin to realize that our view of the world is not the only one that's right. And while it's a difficult thing to recognize that we can disagree and yet both be right, that's an important component of all of this coming together. Challenges and opportunities for civil society. The biggest one and the first one is public apathy, and that relates directly to the will to make things accomplished, to help things be accomplished. If no one cares, if no one's involved, then, you know, as I said, under individual participation, none of this will happen, none of this will work. Strengthening government capacity is a bit of a challenge in that it's not something that's out there and is accepted. It's something that's beginning to be accepted, but it sort of requires a change on a lot of levels for that to become the norm, where when organizations go into a situation, they're not just thinking, how do we help these people today? They're also thinking longer term, how do we help these people in the long run? And then finally, maintaining their own legitimacy. And it's not that this is a new struggle, this is an ongoing struggle. And it's akin to attempting to hold government accountable. It's an ongoing battle where things will, they'll get better and they'll get worse, but it's something that all organizations within civil society need to continue to work towards and continue to improve. And that's all for me for now. Patrick will tell us about the private sector and responsibilities that they have.
Everyone.